The people that inspired me to be a missionary was my parents. They served in Kenya, in Panama, and Costa Rica. And I grew up with their example of being just incredible missionaries. My father was a very gentle man who was a man of science and math. And I got my love for global events from him. He was always teaching me about the countries in the world and what was going on. My mom was very intellectual. She was a huge reader. She was absolutely crazy. She had just a funny, hilarious, spontaneous, crazy personality. I think that I get a lot of my interests from my dad, but I get a lot of my personality and view on God and spirituality. I get that more from my mother. Both of them were really ahead of their time. When they were in Kenya, my father, and this was in the early 60s, he insisted that black Africans could run a school, and even though he was the principal, he was the first to hand over power to a group that consisted of all blacks and Indians in Kenya, which was a huge deal back then and was, way ahead of its time, in a time where there was so much colonialism and racism and belief that Africans couldn't run institutions or do anything organizationally. My mom was on the cutting edge of helping people who were dealing with AIDS back when it was a pandemic and there was no cure. They created the Christian Center in the early 70s, which was designed to make the church a community center and a hub of activities that were not always necessarily Christian. That was a really out of the box idea, about 40 years ahead of its time. And I still get messages from people, seriously, almost about every 2 months, of people will write me and say they knew my parents and that they did something special for them. They did a lot of things in secret. I'm constantly finding out about people they helped, families that had nothing that got food from my parents, money that they gave in emergencies, and it was all behind the scenes. My parents were not people who talked a lot about their faith. They didn't preach at people. They were not overly dogmatic. They very much raised us to believe that it's not what you say, it's what you do. And so their whole life was one of action, not so much words. And there's a saying that I think has really stuck with me over the years that I think really has impacted me and impacted my parents, which is that nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. My parents gave me that love of missions. I'm glad I went into this life. It's hard to believe that I think I've now been a missionary 2 or 3 times longer than they were. Unfortunately, my mom never got to see me on the mission field. She died in 1991 of cancer, but my father did. And one of the greatest things that happened in the last 10 years was when he died in 2013. I was able to fly all the way from Berlin to Costa Rica and see him and talk to him one last time. And then he was so happy I was there and I was able to thank him. And then he died a couple hours later. So I'm glad I was able to thank my dad. I wish I could thank my mom, and I miss them very much.